Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shauna Sanford, co-host of Louisiana, the State We're In. Welcome to this edition of Louisiana Public Square. Over the past year and a half, the Census Bureau has asked U.S. residents to fill out the 2010 form, reminding us that the population count is in our hands. Well, the census is over, and as of February 3rd, the numbers for Louisiana have been finalized. There are over 4.5 million residents in our state. While Louisiana's population grew over the last decade, it was far below the pace of the rest of the country. The decrease in population means Louisiana will have less of a share of $400 billion in federal funds. Louisiana will also lose a congressional seat, something that hasn't happened since 1990. The legislature will hold a special session in March to redraw voting lines for congressional and state districts, as well as the Public Service Commission, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Louisiana Supreme Court, and state courts of appeals. Which areas of the state will be most affected, and how will the new legislative districts impact you and your representation?
The 2010 census data is in, and Louisiana's population growth over the last 10 years has been lackluster, to say the least.
Well, Louisiana has grown by roughly 2%, a little bit less than that, but roughly 2%, whereas the nation as a whole has grown at almost 10%. So Louisiana's growth has been lower than the national level growth.
Troy Blanchard is with LSU's Sociology Department. Blanchard notes that Louisiana's population has grown by only 64,000 people since the 2000 census. Due to its lack of growth, Louisiana will lose one of its 7 congressional House seats. And because of shifts in population, some of the state's House and Senate districts will need to be reconfigured. The legislature will hold a special session starting March 20th to redraw the voting lines.
The goal of redistricting is to make sure that the current set of districts, both for the U.S. Congress and at the state level, are representative of the distribution of the population. So in other words, areas that have had recent growth or decline may gain or lose representation through the increasing or decreasing of the size of a district.
Melissa Flournoy is the director of Louisiana Progress, a statewide political action organization. Her group is concerned that having the state legislature manage redistricting creates a conflict of interest.
Drawing those lines to maintain or to ensure an effective balance of representation is tricky because you've got a lot of incumbent legislators that want to protect their personal interests or their political interests. And so this definitely could be a very contentious special session.
Congressman John Fleming, a Republican who represents the 4th District, defends the legislature's involvement in the process.
The reality is you can never take politics out of it. And if you put a citizens group in there or any other kind of commission, there's going to be politics involved, and those making the decisions will not be accountable to the voters.
State legislators will be accountable to voters as well as the U.S. Department of Justice. Because of Louisiana's history of voting inequities among minorities, the Justice Department must approve the state's final plans. Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District is a majority-minority district created as a result of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It contains nearly all of the city of New Orleans and some of its suburbs. To remain majority-minority, the boundaries will have to expand in order to account for the more than 120,000 African Americans who left following Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
I think you end up with a district that can go from Plaquemine on the south, come all the way up, including Orleans, African Americans in Jefferson, come right up I-10, come through Donaldsonville into Gardere and East Baton Rouge, and up into Scotlandville. That could happen.
Elliott Stonecipher, a political and demographic analyst, says that another option could be to invoke the 2009 Supreme Court decision from the Bartlett versus Strickland voting rights case.
If established patterns of racial crossover vote are adequate to make sure that African Americans have at least a fair shot at the district, then you could have a 46 or 47% African American district.
Maintaining minority districts at the state level shouldn't be as challenging, according to Senator Elbert Guillory, a Democrat from Opelousas. He worked with the Christian advocacy group, the Family Forum, to develop what he calls his demographic equity plan. It maintains the state's 10 majority-minority Senate districts, but rearranges them. The plan also moves 3 Senate seats out of New Orleans, which Guillory says for too long has been the tail that wagged the dog. Guillory defends his proposal against critics such as State Representative Rick Gallo, who says it creates racial polarization.
The number of districts remain constant. The number of minority districts remain constant. And there's no packing of districts, no attempting to concentrate, to heavily concentrate minority persons in a district or heavily concentrate whites into a district. It's an extremely fair presentation from a racial standpoint.
Another area of debate will be over how to eliminate one of the state's 7 congressional seats. State Representative Joe Harrison has proposed merging District 7 and 3 into one coastal district that stretches from Cameron to St. Bernard Parish. Calcasieu Parish would end up in the same district as Shreveport. District 3's freshman Congressman Jeff Landry endorses the plan. But District 7's Representative Charles Bustani says Lake Charles and Lafayette must stay in the same district. He also recently told the Politico online that it would be better to have 2 or 3 members fighting for the Louisiana coastline than just one. Stonecipher advocates one congressman fighting for one North Louisiana district along I-20.
And I'm from Shreveport, but I promise you it doesn't matter where you're from. This is the one that makes sense when you're losing a congressional seat. It'll stretch from Caddo-Bossier over in the northwest part of the state all the way over to Mississippi on the northeast. It would include Ouachita Parish. It's about a parish or 2 deep. It's just a strip following I-20.
But Fleming says that's problematic.
You run into some very difficult apportionment problems because most of the population is around I-20 and north, and so what you end up with is trying to somehow deal with a very large, sparsely populated part of Louisiana, which is central Louisiana.
One map circulating would have Congressman Rodney Alexander's North Louisiana district extending down into the Feliciana parishes. Fleming defends the plan.
Since we're losing a district, every other district is going to have to enlarge geographically and population-wise. For instance, my district is going to have to grow by 88,000 persons. Rodney Alexander's district is going to have to grow by 111,000. And the only way that that's possible is he's going to have to take in more land mass, and that's why his district will have to extend into those areas in the south.
Compounding the task the legislature is facing will be their tight deadline. Due to state elections in the fall, Stonecipher says they have 5 months to draw plans, get them approved by the legislature and the governor, and make any changes that the Justice Department may recommend.
We've had instances since 1970 where it took us 5 years. So I just don't know how we do this.
One approach may be to follow the lead of Greg Rigamer with GCR and Associates. Rigamer has been crunching the state's population numbers for several governmental entities. He says the key is to focus on the basics of the task at hand.
I think a very important thing for people to understand about this process is that it just simply follows demographic trends. As a real practical matter, it's a mathematical exercise. The number of people divided by the number of seats. Now, there's a phenomenal amount of political influence that comes to bear at that point. But at the end of the day, the test is the math.
Well, our studio audience is anxious to take this topic on. They include Baton Rouge area residents who were randomly recruited and surveyed for us by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab. We also have a student joining us from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. reviewing some of the survey questions. When asked how important it is for their district to stay about the same as it is now in the redistricting process, a total of 72% of respondents said it was very or somewhat important. 21% said it was either not very or at all important, and 6% were unsure. Asked the importance of the public having input over how the new districts are drawn, a whopping 91% of those surveyed said it was either very or somewhat important. 7% said it was either not very or at all important, and 3% were unsure. When asked if the state legislature or an independent commission should conduct the redistricting process, 50% said they would prefer an independent commission, 29% were uncertain, and 20% would stick with the legislature. Not surprisingly then, when asked if they have concerns about whether the reapportionment process will be done fairly, 56% said no, 24% were unsure, and 15% said they feel that it will be done fairly. So let's start there. Studio audience, thank you all so very much for being here with us tonight. Do you have confidence that this whole reapportionment process is going to be done fairly? William, we'll start with you.
Well, I think there's going to be a good effort to have it done fairly. The unfortunate thing is that what Louisiana and its representatives come up with is going to be tested by the federal government and the Justice Department. Right. My concern is that I think that there's a greater injustice that has not really been put into this equation, and that is the representation of the entire state, that we're going to lose a congressional seat. Many of our neighboring states are going to pick up congressional seats because of the illegal population in those states. So if you're concerned about my voting rights are being violated because of California, because of Texas, there are 5.6 million illegals in California, and they're counted in the census. So California will send 57 representatives to Washington, to Congress. Texas, our neighbor, very close to same, they're going to pick up an additional 4 to 5 seats. There again, their illegal population is in the 3 million range, which again would make a huge difference in the number of representatives that they would send to Congress.
Right, a very interesting point, and we certainly will get our experts to address that a little bit later on, but I'd like to get input from some of the rest of you. Do you have confidence that this whole process will be handled fairly? Michael, what about you?
I don't know. I'm not all that confident in, having the legislature handle redistricting fairly, because everyone has their own agenda and their own thing to
Well, that's what some of the critics have said, that having the legislature in charge of this certainly amount or could amount or does amount to them essentially protecting their own turf. And Ken, I saw you shaking, nodding your head back there. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that.
Why is that?
It is all about getting a particular party or a particular person or an incumbent into office. And that's how politics works.
Yeah, so you feel that it's going to be very partisan.
Very partisan.
Jessica, what about you?
I do too. I think the point made in the video is true. You cannot take politics out of this, but I still think having elected officials so directly involved is just too much of a conflict of interest. It's naive to think you can take politics out, but I think you could remove it a step from the legislature.
Well, Louisiana is among the majority of states where the legislature is in charge of redrawing the voting lines. Travis, do you have a thought on whether you feel like this is going to be a fair process?
I think it's going to be somewhat fair. I'm not sure exactly on how fair they're going to make it for everybody. When they redraw the districts, from what I can see, the population for like our area, just say, is going to grow. So is that one man that's in charge of that district going to be able to take on that much more population, that much more area? Or is it going to hurt?
Well, it's a fair question, because we have lost population, which means those lines are going to have to be redrawn and configured in a way, because these districts have to be about the same size. So we did hear in that piece that, for example, the 2nd District could extend from New Orleans and into parts of Baton Rouge. And I know the majority of you all are from the Baton Rouge area. Frank, what are your thoughts about that?
I don't think it's going to ever be fair until they get the race issue out the way. they're constantly talking about the black and the white. Now, I understand that segregation itself has been abolished. Now, if segregation has been abolished, then we all should be equal, not only in the what you call predominantly all black neighborhoods or the predominantly all white neighborhood. There should be no such thing as predominantly. We're all equal, and there's no way you can take equalization along with separation and expect a definite outcome of it to say that we're equal. This has got to be taken out of the form altogether. If I was born here in the United States, then I'm just as equal as anybody else. We've been given the stigmatism as being what you call African American. Now that stigmatism is going to follow us as long as we hold on to it, due to the fact that there are so many different ethnic races here.
So let me interrupt you for just a second, because I want to be sure that I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that race should not be a factor when drawing these lines?
Well, if there was any equalization involved, there wouldn't have to be any lines concerning that, because we will all have an opportunity to live wherever we choose to live and not in a predominantly area.
Right. Well, as we saw in that piece, Louisiana is under the Department of Justice, one of 16 states. We'll have to have our plan approved by the Department of Justice. Fran, your thoughts about that?
We can't rewrite what we're dealing with at this particular moment in time on the redistricting issues as far as the race issue goes because of the history of the state. I agree that we do have to consider race. We do have to have a fair amount of representation for the minorities. But I also think we should also consider the economic issues in that minority, within that minority, because you get into the area just trying to include it, draw a certain area because of the race, you lose a lot of the economic issues between the diversity between the people in that area.
Well, what do you say to those folks who say we have to include race because we have to make certain that there is equal representation of all races, of all people in the state?
I mean, we have to. I mean, you can't say that we can shut that door right now. I mean, we want to get there where we don't have to, and we can include draw lines with an equal representation in each area of races, saying that we have a certain amount of white, a certain amount of black in this particular area, and that would be fair enough. Mm-hmm. Now we can go there, and it could be equally divvied up across the state, where we have 50-40 or 40-50, and it balances out. We'll get there.
Jose, I'd like to get your take on this.
I don't think race should have anything to do with it.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. We're talking about votes. And whoever is voted into that district is supposed to be representing everybody, regardless of your race, ethnic background, whatever. Shouldn't have anything to do with it at all. And it shouldn't be made up of little districts that look like a little bunch of islands and a little peninsula sticking out over here or there. I've seen some that look pretty good, but it should have nothing to do with race. And I think an independent commission should be able to do it, because they're saying that they don't answer to the people. They don't answer to the people either.
Well, the legislature answers to the people. That's what he was saying, that the legislature answers in terms of voting. When it comes to voting, that's what Congressman Fleming was referring to. But you're saying that you do not support the legislature being in charge of this because you don't think that they'll do it fairly.
They've had enough time to do something right, and they haven't been able to do it right. Give somebody else an opportunity.
Robert, your thoughts?
I agree with these two gentlemen here. I don't think it should be about race. I think it should be equal across the board. Otherwise, you're going to have these little, like a little outpost where you're trying to figure a percentage of whites against a percentage of blacks, and I don't see how they could do it.
Very interesting. Celeste?
The mathematician in me says it should be strictly numbers. We should be able to give a map with the populations of each parish to a gifted and talented junior high class and give them the parameters, and they should be able to figure it out. It shouldn't, and that's one of the few ways you're going to take politics out of it. There's no way not to. But then there's this other part of me that looks at the representation we have right now, and when I look at the faces of the people who are representing our state, I don't necessarily feel like I'm well represented there.
Okay, so why is that? I mean, because they are elected by the people.
They are elected by the people, but and I guess part of the problem is that people don't get out to vote, and so it's never going to look like the face of our state. But you know, I think if you let the people in power do whatever they want, they're going to do everything that they can to stay in power, and you're going to have them draw these districts and do them in a way that they will get what they want.
Yeah, so you question whether the public will really have any input. I mean, they are going on a tour starting very soon to get public input, and so do you question whether
I don't think they're going on a tour to get public input. I think they're going on a tour to get public support. I think your congressman is going to go to your district and he's going to say, it's so important that our district stay our district. And it doesn't have anything, well, it may have a little to do with how he feels about his constituents, but it's mostly about him keeping his job.
Okay.
And the bottom line is there are 7 people who all want to keep their jobs, and one of them is out.
Is out, that's right. Lawrence,
Well,
your comment, and then we have to wrap it up.
Okay. This gerrymandering thing with the, like we mentioned, the snaking up from New Orleans all the way up to Scotlandville.
Yes.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
None whatsoever.
If they can't gerrymander without coming that far north to find a few extra votes, then they need to let somebody else do it.
It's called the barbell system, and it's going to be struck down
that's
by
right.
the Justice
Department of Justice has not ever approved that barbell system. We're going to get into all of this with our panel of experts as soon as we return, so be sure to stay right there. We have lots more to talk about. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. The hot topic tonight is redrawing Louisiana's voting lines. Joining us now is our panel of experts. State Representative Rick Gallo is a Democrat from Ruston, whose district was established after the 1990 census to guarantee a black voter majority. Gallo is the chairman of the House and Governmental Affairs Committee, which will oversee redistricting in that chamber. Senator Jack Donahue is a Republican from Mandeville. His district is in the top 3 Senate districts that have seen the largest population gains since 2000. Donahue is a member of the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee, which will manage reapportionment in that body. Allison Newstrom is the research director for the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana, also known as PAR. PAR is a private nonprofit organization offering solutions to Louisiana issues through objective research. PAR has just released its latest analysis of the redistricting process. And Dr. Pearson Cross heads the political science department at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. When it comes to Louisiana politics, Dr. Cross regularly contributes to national, local, and statewide media. He also serves on the American Democracy Project Committee. Welcome all of you to the program. It is great to have you here. And I know that you've been listening to our studio audience. We have a lively group tonight, so we're going to go right back to the audience. And Ray, I know you have a question for the experts.
Yeah, my question is this, that given the short time frame we have to get it done, how far along into the process is the legislature? And if so, would the first thing you do be to ensure a majority-minority district, or would you look at the population first? How do you go about starting the process?
And that's a very good question. Every 20 years, we're actually faced with this short time frame. As a matter of fact, our neighbors, Mississippi, is also under this same time frame. So we are exactly where we thought we would be in terms of our timeline. We just received our total census data package about a week ago, and actually our staff worked through the ICE day to make sure they got all that information inputted. So we will go on the road, and I know there may be some time to talk about this later in terms of going around the state and actually getting input from the public. And I tell you, this has been an incredible opportunity to hear from all of you, and these are all the things that I think are real concerns for citizens of the state, and that's why as chairman, I've certainly tried to make sure that this process would be open, accessible to the public. We've got a Facebook page, we've got a Twitter account, we've got a portion of our legislative website is dedicated exclusively to redistricting, so that anyone sitting in this audience or watching at home can access what we're doing. You can watch us stream live on the internet during our meeting. So I can't speak for anybody else, but certainly for this chairman, what people think when we go to these community meetings all around the state will absolutely play a part in the decisions that I make when it comes time to vote for a plan.
It's a great point that Ray brings up, because Louisiana actually has the quickest turnaround time of any state having to go through this process. And this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time that Louisiana has had the census to deal with the census numbers and reapportionment and elections in the fall.
No, we do that every 20 years. So this was actually during the 90 round. We were under the
same sort of scenario.
Yeah, and again, we're one of 4 states nationally, and so the Census Bureau actually released our figures along with the other 3 states early because they knew that we would have this short time frame. So trust me, we didn't just start planning for this. My staff and I were actually sitting down 2 years ago to start planning for this, and this round of statewide meetings is actually our second one. We had another 9 regional meetings around the state last January, so we could talk about the census and tell the public about redistricting. Of course, they weren't very well attended, despite our best effort to make everyone aware. But certainly, after watching this show, I know that people across the state are going to be engaged in the process.
Senator Donahue, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, the Senate operates a little bit differently than the House does. We actually have our first committee meeting tomorrow in Baton Rouge to receive the census data and to establish rules. Thursday, we have the first meeting of Senate Governmental Affairs, which is the group that's going to do the redistricting in the Senate side. We have our first meeting. We're going across the state in Covington. That's the district that I live in and represent portions of that district. And I heard a comment before about about not listening. I tell you, when nothing's better when you're a state representative or a senator representing people than to go to a meeting and have people be knowledgeable about the subject and want to talk about it, because that's how we get our information. So it's very valuable to us, as Chairman Gallo said, to be able to go around the state and hear what the people have to say. It's time consuming, but it's important, and we do go to listen. We did the same thing with streamlining last year. We went across the state, and the purpose was not to talk, but to shut up and listen to what the people had to say about what's important in the state. The people will speak, give them the opportunity to do that. So I'm hoping that as we go across the state, we get to have knowledgeable audiences like this of people who understand what the issues are and are capable of expressing themselves. We'll listen and we understand.
Well, this audience certainly has had a lot to say, in particular about the minority-majority districts. And Philip, I know you have a question about that.
Right, in reference to what we were talking about earlier, about the necessity of majority-minority districts. The consensus seemed to be that they aren't necessary. I'm going to have to disagree with that and say that they are a necessary evil. And I was curious what the panel thought. Is Louisiana in a state of racial utopia? Do we still need a minority-majority district to represent minorities in the state?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in, especially since I represent a majority-minority district, and I will say that based upon the history of elections in this state, and I mean, it's not something that we should be proud of, but it's a reality that racially polarized voting still takes place in this state. And again, as much as I would like to think that we are a post-racial society, we are not. I think we've come a long way, and certainly for a district like mine, it's 56-44, and on election day, it's about 50-50. So, in any given day, I may be just as concerned about the black professors at Grambling State University as I am about the chicken farmers in North Claiborne Parish. I'm not locked into one constituency or the other. It's about the overall good. So I think, it's good that I have an opportunity to be able to serve and hopefully be effective. But unfortunately, there are still some people in this state who are not as open-minded and still cannot pull the lever for someone of another race.
Allison, could you jump in?
Well, I think there's been some really great dialogue around the question of majority-minority districts, and I think a tremendous first step would be for Louisiana to have a redistricting session with plans that were not successfully challenged as diluting the ability of minority voters to elect candidates of their choice. I think that would be a great first step in beginning towards the path to being removed from oversight from the Department of Justice. And the reality is that a state has to evidence 10 years of successful elections, of successful redistricting plans to seek a bailout from the Department of Justice. And so I think that the opportunity is before us now in 2011 to demonstrate to the Department of Justice, to begin to demonstrate to minority voters and to our counterparts around the country that we are ready to establish plans free of oversight from the Department of Justice.
Dr. Cross, you agree with that?
I would agree with it. That's a great goal. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're going to face a challenge from the Department of Justice. I think it has to do with the demographics of the diaspora in Louisiana. As you know, there are 4 majority-minority Senate districts around down in the New Orleans area. Currently, they only have enough people in those districts to make up about not even 3 full districts. So they're going to have to move those districts. But the problem is that in order to create a majority-minority district and make sure that it's compact and contiguous and it relates to a community, you've got to have a compact, contiguous community. If you start reaching, you're going to start drawing all kinds of crazy-shaped districts, and if you do that, you're going to get a challenge. Now, the Justice Department is going to make sure that we have not entered into some sort of retrogression with regard to minority representation. If we try to create districts and make sure that we don't slide back from the number of seats, I think there are 27 majority-minority seats in the Louisiana Legislature today. In the House side, we may have to, at some point, create some districts that to equal that do some things that are going to raise some eyebrows. You know, Sandra Day O'Connor said quite famously, appearances in the area of redistricting really do matter. And if we draw some districts that look on the map to the eye as if we are trying to count by race, we are going to have some problems. But I don't see how we can get out of it.
Well, the fact of the matter is we can't have fewer districts, right?
That would be an automatic red flag.
We can't do that.
And that would be a retrogression claim that I think would probably be successful.
Yes, William, your question.
Well, I was going to ask the representative how confident you are that you're going to be able to redraw those districts to meet those federal guidelines.
Well,
you've been there before, so you should know how to do it.
I am one of 2 on my committee of 19 who's been through it before. There are 11 of the 105 who've been through it in the House. So obviously, education was an important component of our planning, which again started a couple of years ago. So we've actually had training seminars for our members, and we've encouraged them to go to national seminars so that they could learn more about the process. Within the House and the Senate, we have staff who are nationally recognized in the area of redistricting. Glenn Kemp, who's Secretary of the Senate, is recognized nationally. Butch Spear, our clerk, Patricia Lowry Dufour in the House. I mean, these are people who've done it 3 and 4 times. So certainly with their assistance in the drafting aspect of plans, absolutely, we can get it done.
And are you all talking with the DOJ as you go along to make sure that you're, taking care of things that need to be taken care of and that there isn't any sort of challenge? But I mean, at the end of the day, are you really expecting there to be some sort of court challenge no matter what happens?
We have analysts who are assigned to Louisiana. So when we submit our information, there are a set of analysts who are there to receive and work just on our plan. I think we know what the legal parameters are, and again, it's my position as chairman and speaker of the House and all of us in leadership to set the tone that this set of plans we believe will comply with federal law and try to sell the plan to the membership. But again, we won't do that until we go around the state and talk to the citizens before we sit down and do that.
And from the Senate side, we've met with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice twice to try to talk to those folks so we can have an idea and an understanding of just what is required of the legislature in relation to the guidelines that are laid out. So So I think we have, we have the right approach. We have a basic understanding of what's required, and going to be able to draw it. That doesn't mean it won't be challenged. I suspect we probably will have some challenges, but that's all you can do is draw the plan, and then whoever's going to challenge it can challenge it. That's the way our country is. So.
Well, we started off talking about whether the audience here has any confidence that this whole process is going to be done fairly, because the legislature is in charge, solely responsible for redrawing these lines. And Ken, you brought up this whole concern about partisanship.
Partisan fairness concerns me. Currently, 50% of Louisiana is Democrats, 23% are other than that, and 26 or 27% are Republicans. And yet, if you would look at our delegation, it's 85% Republican. I don't feel like I'm personally being represented.
Well, let me say that that's really not, the statistics aren't correct. The Senate, I've been in the Senate for 3 years. The Senate has always been a Democratic Senate. There are some people recently that were elected Democrats that have made a switch to Republicans, and if your senator did that, then I can understand what your feelings are. And on the House side, I think we're looking at the first time that there are actually more Republicans in the House than there are in the Senate. Excuse me, there are more Republicans in the House than there are Democrats. So it's really right now there's a very delicate balance between Democrats and Republicans in both bodies. I think the House right now has several more Republicans than Democrats. In the Senate, we're going to have to wait till the results of these last couple elections that are ongoing right now to know whether the Republicans will actually control the Senate or not. A large group of people or voters in the state of Louisiana are independents. And in my district, we probably have a percentage of as many independents as we do Republicans. Sometimes those independents vote for Democrats, and sometimes those independents vote Republicans. Hopefully what they're doing is voting for the candidates. I'm sorry you don't feel well represented, but it's not quite as bad as you're thinking, and I just want to express that to you.
Yes, Dr. Cross?
Yeah. As far as partisan go, you're right. We are in the middle of a historic switch from Democrats to Republicans. Republican Party's gaining majority status in Louisiana. I don't think there's any other way to cut it. We have, essentially every statewide elected office is held by a Republican. The legislature, the House just went Republican. The Senate, based on what happens in District 26 election, may or may not go Republican. It's historic. It's historic. And that being said, however, this is about incumbent protection more, I think, than partisanship at this point. I think that there are people in the House and Senate who want to keep their seats, want to protect those seats, and I think they'll fight to create a seat that they can get elected in. So when you look around, you say, well, yes, there is a movement towards the GOP, and yes, that's going to be an issue, and yes, you can't take politics out of the process. But frankly, Democrats are going to get safe districts, Republicans are going to get safe districts, in my view, and that's the way the game's played. They're going to protect themselves where they can. They're going to make deals. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Is that bad? Well, I don't know. Those people got elected to represent people in the first place, so they just want to do more of the same.
Well, I think that's a concern that many people here raised with the legislature being in control, and I know that PAR has done quite a bit of research on that very topic.
Right, and in PAR's recent report, we reiterate a recommendation that was made in early 2009 that the state move to the redistricting model that would assign this responsibility to an independent commission rather than the legislature. And so PAR is making a handful of recommendations for the 2011 redistricting session around the issues of transparency, clear access to information, as well as the rules that will guide the process. But we're strongly standing behind the 2009 recommendation that an independent commission should be established to carry out the work of redistricting.
Representative Gallo, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, and Alice and I had an opportunity to talk about this while you all were in here, and I think it's popular now that states are looking at it, but I don't know that there's any empirical data to suggest that to have a commission is better, a better system than legislative. I mean, I can tell you, and from listening to all of you speak as we were outside, and I get it. I understand that there is frustration among the citizens that we can't be trusted not only with this process, but with anything else. But I can tell you that, again, there are only 11 of us who were around the last time. The majority of the legislature was not involved in this process 10 years ago, and certainly not 20 years ago. I mean, there's only one member in the House who was around, and that's Noble, who was around 20 years ago. So I think that if you evaluate what processes we've put in place to do it this time around, and again, you see what the final result is, look at what we do and judge us based upon what we do this time around, not what our predecessors did. The gentleman who preceded me in doing this the last time had been around for 30 years. I've been in the legislature 10 years. Again, judge us on what we do this time around, and if we fail, I'll come back and eat crow with every last one of you sitting here. But certainly we're doing everything we can to make this process accessible and available to not only those of you here in the studio audience tonight, but to everybody in this state.
Well, in PAR's recent report, we do absolutely commend the work of the current leaders of the redistricting process for greater transparency, for publishing rules almost a year in advance and inviting the public to weigh in on those rules, to advertising the public hearings early, and really wanting the citizens to get engaged. So we absolutely do see really positive signs in that regard. And PAR's recommendation is based on the principle that the process of incumbent legislators drawing their own district lines is riddled with the opportunity for self-interest, for gerrymandering based on party interests or incumbent or the interests of the current incumbents. And so this recommendation is not based on one particular plan or one particular legislature, and PAR is joining many other organizations, including the American Bar Association, AARPs in several states, Alliance for Good Government, that just believe that this tie between incumbent legislators drawing the lines of the districts that they will soon run in needs to be broken.
Senator Donahue.
Yeah, you know, I just can't help but disagree with you.
Okay.
You know, I waited till I was 62 years old before I decided to run for public office, and I'm a businessman. I run a construction company, and that's what I've done all my life. I've served on a board of PAR. I was chairman of Lobby. I've been in the state of Louisiana as a business person, and now I'm in this political arena, and I think that I am able to represent the people on the North Shore to create a district. Hopefully I'll be in that district, but if I wasn't, it wouldn't be the worst thing that's happened in my life, but create a district that is representative of what goes on in the North Shore. And I think each of these legislators, I mean, I understand it's very popular to talk about legislators and self-protection and all that kind of stuff. I tell you, my district has 20,000 people more than it did in 2000. So essentially 20,000 people have to come out of that district. And the district next to me has fewer people, so probably those districts are just going to merge. I mean, it's really, in my area, I presume it could be more difficult in other areas. But on the North Shore, in the area I represent, it's going to be relatively simple. You know, you can use small lines to draw people in or out, but I don't think it's rocket science. And I think the people that I've met in my brief term in the legislature, I have all the confidence in the world that they're going to be able to take a look at what needs to be done and do it fairly and honestly and represent the people that elected them to go there to do their job. Now, if you all can't trust us to go there and do that job properly, please get rid of us because we're not able to do our job. That's what we're supposed to do. We represent you. And if we can't do that, then, you know, I don't know what a legislature is supposed to do, and you need to change those legislators if you can't trust them to do this, because this is what it's about. This is a political process, and I think it's best controlled the way it's being controlled now.
Let's talk a little bit about the congressional districts, and we have a map that I'd like for everybody to take a look at. We have a graphic that we're going to bring up. This is the current district right now. We have 7 districts, and of course we're going to lose one of these districts. And because of that, all of these districts are going to have to increase in size because they will have to be relatively about the same size. Is that correct? About 750,000? Is that
755?
755. So let's look at our next graphic. We're going to put 2 proposals side by side. This is this concerns the formation of the coastal districts because this is a big topic now. This one that we see here at the top is a map that's favored by Representative Jeff Landry, who currently represents the 3rd District. Under this proposal, it would take away a good portion of District 7, which is represented currently by Congressman Charles Boustany. He is very concerned about that. Congressman Boustany is, of course, in favor of the lower map there. Congressman Boustany says that under the one proposed up top, that Jeff Landry supports, Calcasieu Parish would be pulled into District 4, and that would take Lake Charles, which is one of the largest ports, away from the coastline areas, and that would be a disservice to that area. Not only that, but he says that it would be unfair to have just one representative represent the interest of those folks who do live along the coast, and that Louisiana would lose a lot of clout in D.C. if, in fact, that were to happen.
There are a couple of competing camps, so to speak. There's one set who says, all right, here are the things we have in common: hurricanes, coastal erosion, oil spills, seafood. We want one voice who will speak for us. That's one side. The other side says, well, we think we have more power if there are 2 or more voices speaking on behalf of us in Washington. As I sit here tonight, I can't tell you that one side is right or wrong. I think our responsibility right now is to go to Houma next week and Baton Rouge here and to New Orleans and to Lafayette and Lake Charles and hear from the people. Now, I've spoken to 5 different groups in the Lake Charles area, and they have all consistently said, and these were Rotary Club, Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce groups, who all said, we have nothing in common with Shreveport. Mm-hmm. And no matter what you do, please don't put us in a district with Shreveport because the interests of Northwest are different than Northeast. That is absolutely resonating with me. And I think it will resonate with everyone. And again, once we are able to go around the state and get that kind of input from people, then we can put it together and say, well, you know, it's great that the congressmen have talked about this, but guess what? This is what the people want, and we're here to be responsive to what they're asking us to do.
Dr. Cross?
From a political science point of view, more representatives are better. It's quite clear. There may be a certain affinity of having a coast be one cohesive unit with one representative, but when you're talking about voices in the U.S. Congress, you want more voices. If they can figure out a way to get 3 representatives down there on the coast to try to do some of that heavy lifting that is obviously needed, that's a better way to do it than one, and that's just from the standpoint of clout in Congress.
Mm-hmm. Senator Donahue?
Well, you know, I represent St. Tammany and Tangipahoa Parish, and Southeastern is in Tangipahoa Parish. It's a great university, and they have 3 senators that represent Tangipahoa Parish. And there's some conversation in the redistricting that maybe Tangipahoa might have its own Senate seat. And the people, particularly people at the university, would like to see more representation. They would like to have 3 senators, as they do now, representing them, as opposed to 1 senator representing them, because 3 senators out of 39 is almost 10% of the Senate representing the interest of Southeast University. That's important to them, so I kind of understand and agree with what I'm hearing about more perhaps is better.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, I'd like to get you to jump in. You were talking earlier about your concerns about gerrymandering. Yes.
On the plan that you're working on now, I saw that you said at one point from New Orleans up to Scotlandville in order to maintain that majority-minority district. Is that really necessary?
Well, currently there is a district that has that footprint, and that's the Louisiana Public Service Commission. So there is precedent for that type of district configuration, which has been pre-cleared by the Department of Justice in the past. Now again, we've not drawn any line, so all of this is just conversation about ideas. But it does become a mathematical issue when you're trying to maintain a majority-minority district. And you have to draw it where the people are who fit the demographic. And again, because we are a Section 5 state and the Justice Department has to pre-clear it, if we send a congressional plan to Washington that has no majority-minority district, the Justice Department will send it back. So we have an obligation under federal law to draw that district. So, you know, again, we would like to think we live in a post-racial society where, you know, anyone can run and have an equal opportunity to be elected. We're not quite there yet. So until we get this 10-year span where we can show as a state that we've passed no law that is discriminatory against minorities, then we will continue to be covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
Yes, go ahead.
I have one question, Sir Greg. I'm not a politician. I don't know anything about politics too much, but I am interested. I am an interested citizen. And I would like for somebody to explain to me, how can you get an equalization of, say, race out of it when it's all involved?
Well, again, the basic premise, and I'm sure we could get probably a more educated response about from a political science standpoint, but the fact of the matter remains that race is a part of this process, and I guess because I've been going around the state and talking to different groups of all shades and everything, I feel very comfortable talking about it because, I mean, regardless of whether you like it or not, it's a part of the process. So what we do is we have to deal with the issues at hand, and race is absolutely a part of the redistricting process, whether it's the legislature or a commission or whomever doing it. It's a part of the process.
That's true, too. Now, we're talking about history. History is past. We're talking about present change. As long as we deal with history and continue with history, we're never going to have a present. Now, something's got to change, and the only way it can change is to get history out of the way.
Well, again, we're given an opportunity to go forward if we can show a 10-year period, and that could start, with this session. And if 10 years from now we can show that during that decade there was no discriminatory law passed here in Louisiana affecting voting rights, then we can file a petition with the federal government to opt out.
I'd like to get Dr. Cross to jump in, yes.
You know, it's a difficult point, but we have two contradictory ideals. We say that every person's vote should equal another person's vote. Everybody's fundamentally equal. That was established in a 1962 court case, Baker versus Carr. But we also have this idea that people and communities deserve a certain amount of representation. Back in the day when blacks were not allowed to serve on juries, we look back at those days and we say, look, there's something fundamentally unfair about an all-white jury hearing all cases, including cases involving African Americans. So we have the idea that communities have interests and have identifiable interests that should be represented, and then we have the idea that everybody's absolutely equal. Hey, those butt against each other, and there is no solution to that conundrum right now, and certainly not, as Rick pointed out, within the context of race line voting. As long as blacks vote for blacks overwhelmingly, and as long as whites vote for whites overwhelmingly in Louisiana, getting past race right now is a pretty hard thing to do.
And yes, go ahead, Travis.
Say you went to the public and you held a vote in Louisiana that between the people, that if what they thought.
Well, if the vote, if the result of the vote was that whites voted one way and blacks voted the other way, then it might prove that point.
We're going in a circle here. We can't look at the past, but look at my record in the past. We got to look to the future, but look at the past. We got to say, we're going to do it this way now. We can't be talking about the way it used to be. That's why we progress. We're not still in a cave with fire.
I was in Lafayette last week, and there was an African American mayor who was elected from a majority white town. I don't remember.
Purvis Morrison, Scott.
Yeah. So I mean, that we can show that there are some areas where race relations have improved to the point that an African American can be elected in a majority white city. So certainly this isn't a just.
And another point is in the Senate we have 2 majority minority districts who elected white senators. So, I mean, there is some change going on that you can see.
We have run out of time, and so we want to thank our panelists, Representative Rick Gallo, Senator Jack Donahue, Allison Newstrom, and Dr. Pearson Cross, as well as our fantastic audience. When we come back, I'll have a few closing comments, so please stay tuned. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to attend one of the public input meetings that the House and Senate Governmental Affairs Committees will be hosting around the state in a lead-up to the special session on redistricting. You can find a link to the schedule by visiting our website at lpb.org/publicsquare. You'll also find links to PAR's redistricting analysis as well as maps of proposed plans in our print backgrounder. We encourage you also to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you like we did last month from Gail after our program, Saving Higher Ed. Concerning the proposed SUNO-UNO merger, Gail writes, "Our son Joseph is a UNO student. He was planning on getting his doctorate but has since changed his mind because of the discussion of merging. I understand finances. I am a business owner, but there has to be another alternative." Many, many thanks to Gail for posting her comment. LPB will continue to monitor the merger proposal and higher education issues and keep you updated on Louisiana, the state we're in. Join Louisiana Public Square next month as we explore what President Obama recently called our generation's Sputnik moment. Discover the role the state plays in renewable and clean energy as we take on the topic, how green is Louisiana? Thanks so much for watching and have a good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.